The satellite had been dark for 3 years, 2 months, and 19 days. $11 billion of engineering. 47 scientists. One mission that was supposed to map the deep ocean floor well enough to change the way humanity understood the planet. And instead it was orbiting in total silence, sending back nothing but static, while the woman responsible for it had not slept more than 4 hours in any single night since the failure began. Director Elaine Voss stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office on the 14th floor of Meridian Aerospace and looked at the parking lot below without seeing it. Because what she was actually seeing was the quarterly board presentation she had to give in 11 days, the one that would determine whether the Athena program received its final funding tranche of $340 million, or was quietly buried in the kind of language that sounds like mercy and is actually an execution. She had briefed 15 senators this year. She had personally called the NASA administrator 4 times. She had done everything that was within her power and several things that were not, and the satellite was still dark. And her chief engineer was still unable to tell her why. And somewhere between her 3rd coffee and her 4th this morning, she had begun to feel, very quietly, like a woman standing on ice in a room where she can hear the temperature rising. She was 41 years old. She had built this division from 11 people to 260. She had a daughter who lived with her ex-husband in Portland and called her every Sunday night. And on those calls, she always asked how work was going, and Elaine always said fine. And neither of them mentioned the thing that was true, which was that Elaine had not taken a vacation in 3 years, that the guest bedroom in her apartment was full of briefing binders, that the one thing her money could not fix and her authority could not reach was the specific quality of silence that existed in her life between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., when there was nothing left to do but think about what she had given up to be the person who stood at this window in this office. She did not say any of this on those calls. She had learned, very early, that the people who show everything lose everything. Downstairs, on the 3rd floor, in the corridor outside the server room, Marcus Webb was mopping a floor. He was 34. He wore the gray uniform of the Meridian facilities staff, with the small M embroidered on the chest pocket, and his cart smelled like pine. And he moved with the particular economy of someone who has learned not to waste anything, including movement. The mop handle in his left hand had a small crack in it from where he had caught it in a door hinge 6 months ago, and not yet requisitioned a replacement. Because in his experience requisition forms took longer than just working around it. His right forearm, below the rolled-up cuff, carried a burn scar in the shape of a question mark that he had never explained to anyone at Meridian, because no one at Meridian had ever asked. He had a daughter named Priya. She was 7. She had a gap between her 2 front teeth and a habit of narrating her own actions in the 3rd person when she was concentrating. Priya is pouring the juice very carefully now. She is doing an excellent job. And she carried with her everywhere a small black notebook, spiral-bound, with a NASA patch ironed onto the cover. The notebook had belonged to his wife. He had given it to Priya when she was 4, because she had found it in a drawer and asked what it was, and he had said it was a book for writing down important things, and she had said, "Then I need it." And he had not argued. Because she was right, and because the look she gave him when she said it was the exact same look her mother used to give him, and he had discovered that he could not argue with that look any more than he had ever been able to argue with the original. His wife had died in a car accident when Priya was 11 months old. He did not think about this in terms of grief anymore. He thought about it in terms of the mortgage, 18 months remaining, $72,000 outstanding, and the school district rezoning meeting scheduled for March 4th, that would determine whether Priya stayed in the bilingual program she loved or was moved to a school across town that she did not. He was eating lunch. He ate lunch in the corridor outside the server room because the break room on 3 smelled like burned plastic from a microwave someone had destroyed 2 years ago and never replaced. And because the corridor was cool and quiet and no one came down here between noon and 1, he had a thermos of rice and a folded piece of paper covered in handwritten notation that he had been working on for the past 8 days. Because 8 days ago he had been mopping the corridor outside the open door of the signal analysis lab, and he had heard 2 engineers arguing about the Athena satellite. And he had heard the specific phrase spectral phase inversion in the command handshake protocol, and something in him had become very still, the way a tuning fork becomes still just before it begins to vibrate. He had not mentioned this to anyone. He ate his rice and looked at the paper and thought. He had been at JPL once. Briefly, he had a master's in aerospace systems engineering from Caltech that he had completed at 23, and for 2 years after that, he had worked on deep space communication protocols at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And then his wife died, and Priya needed someone, and the job at Meridian had been the first thing with stable hours and a location that didn't require a security clearance for childcare pickup. He had not listed the Caltech degree on his Meridian application. He had listed his high school diploma and his facilities management certification and his forklift operator's license. He did not advertise things that confused people. He finished his rice. He looked at the paper. He wrote 2 more lines, and then he looked at what he had written and sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then, he folded the paper in half, put it in his chest pocket next to the embroidered M, and picked up the mop. He knew what was wrong with the satellite. Elaine was in the elevator when it happened. The door opened on 3, and a man in a gray facilities uniform walked in carrying a mop, and she moved to the left out of habit, and the door closed, and she was reading her phone. And he said nothing, and then he said, quietly, the Athena dropout rate follows a 19-day cycle. She looked up. He was looking at the elevator panel. He was not looking at her. He said, the spectral phase inversion in the command handshake. The timing error compounds on a 19-day cycle tied to the satellite's thermal expansion. The command signal and the receive window go out of alignment by 112 milliseconds every 19 days. When the drift crosses the threshold, the handshake fails. It looks like a hardware failure because the drift resets every cycle. It's not hardware. It's a clock synchronization problem. She said nothing. He said, you can fix it with a software patch to the ground station timing sequence. You don't have to recall the satellite. You don't have to rebuild the command module. A pause. 48 hours to write and test the patch. Maybe 60 if you want to be careful. The elevator reached 14. She looked at him for the first time, his hands on the mop handle, calloused, stained with something that might have been machine oil. The burn scar visible below the cuff. The small black notebook visible in his chest pocket, because he kept it there. He had been keeping it there for 8 days because it had her annotations in it, and he had been reading them every lunch break. She processed him into a category. Facilities, 3rd floor, nobody. She assigned a value. The value felt suddenly and precisely wrong. She said, "Who are you?" He said, "Marcus Webb." 3rd floor maintenance. He looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were very calm. The cycle started again yesterday. Day 1. You have 19 days before it drops out again, and the board meeting is in 11. That's enough time. She asked, before she had decided to ask it, "How do you know about the board meeting?" He looked at the elevator doors as they opened. He said, "I mop the 14th floor on Wednesdays." He walked out. He did not look back. Her daughter Priya was waiting in the lobby at 5:30. Elaine did not know this yet. What she knew, standing in the elevator as the doors began to close again, was that her chest was doing something she did not have a category for. The facilities office told her he was gone for the day. The HR file told her almost nothing. Marcus Webb, hired 4 years ago, perfect attendance record, no escalations, emergency contact listed as a school, Oak Hill Elementary, room 14. She wrote the school's name down. She did not know why yet. She knew by 8 p.m. that he was right. Her lead signal engineer, Dr. Patricia Osai, ran the numbers twice, then a third time with a different methodology, and came into Elaine's office at 8:22 and sat down without being asked and said, very quietly, "Where did this come from?" And Elaine said, "The 3rd floor," and Patricia said, "What?" And Elaine said, "Get me everything we have on the Athena Command handshake from the last 3 years, and model the 19-day thermal drift. Tell me what you find by morning." Patricia found what Marcus had found. She found it in 6 hours. The fix was real. She got to Oak Hill Elementary the next morning at 7:45. She had not slept. She was wearing a coat over a blouse she had not changed, and her coffee was in a paper cup, and she was aware that she did not look like a director of aerospace operations. She looked like a person who had been awake for 20 hours, which was what she was. Priya was already there, in the schoolyard, sitting on the low brick wall near the gate, with the spiral notebook open on her knees, writing something with extreme concentration, while narrating quietly to herself. She was wearing one red sneaker and one blue one. Not a mistake, a decision. You could tell by the way she looked at them. Elaine stopped at the gate. Priya looked up, assessed her with the brisk, unceremonious confidence of a 7-year-old who has decided you are worth one full look, and said, "My dad says the best engineers are the ones who notice what everyone else already stopped hearing. Are you one of those?" Elaine said, "Carefully, I'm trying to find out." Priya said, "He's inside. He does the morning floors before the kids come." She looked back at her notebook. He was up until 2. He does that when he's close to something. Close to something. Elaine's throat did something she did not permit herself to name. She went inside. She found him in the main corridor, on his knees, repairing a section of baseboard that had pulled away from the wall. He had a small hammer and a box of finishing nails, and he was working with the focused neatness of someone for whom doing a thing correctly is not a choice, but a standard. He looked up when she stopped beside him. He did not look surprised. She said, "I need to know who you are." He considered this. He set the hammer down, not hurriedly, and stood and looked at her, and she understood suddenly that whatever category she had put him in, he had known she would come back, and had waited, not impatiently, just accurately. He said, "You already ran the numbers." She said, "The patch works." Patricia ran it 3 times. A pause. "You wrote that in 1 lunch break." He said, 8 days. She said, "You were carrying it for 8 days." It was not a question. He said, "I needed to be sure before I said anything." You can't unsay something like that to someone in your position. She looked at him. She said, "Caltech?" He said, "Class of 2013. JPL Communications Division, 2013 to 2015. She had already checked. She had pulled what she could from academic databases at midnight, which is how she knew that his master's thesis at Caltech, Thermal Drift Compensation in Deep Space Telemetry Handshake Protocols, had been cited 41 times in the literature, including twice by engineers working on the original Athena command module. He had written the theory. Someone else had built the system wrong, and he had been mopping their floors while the system failed. She said, "Why did you leave JPL?" He said, "My wife died." He did not say it with pain or performance. He said it the way you say a fact about geography. The river is to the north. This happened. I am here. Priya was 11 months old. I needed hours that didn't move. She did not say she was sorry. She understood, from something in his face, that he did not want her to, and also that he had been said sorry to enough times to have developed an immunity to it. She said, "I'd like to offer you a consulting contract to implement the patch." He said, "I know." She said, "The board meeting is in 11 days. He said, "I know." She said, "Is that enough time?" He said, "Yes." He picked up the hammer. "The baseboard takes 20 minutes. Tell your facilities manager I'll be done before first bell." There was a man named Garrett Hale who had a problem with this. Garrett Hale was the deputy director of strategic acquisitions at Meridian, and he had been at Meridian for 12 years. And in those 12 years, he had developed a particular talent for identifying which assets were undervalued and acquiring them before anyone else realized they were valuable, and a particular intolerance for situations in which someone outside his circle of attention became relevant. He arrived at Elaine's office the morning after Marcus was onboarded as a consulting engineer. He adjusted both his cuffs before speaking, right, then left, a two-part movement so automatic he appeared unaware of it. And he sat down without waiting to be invited, picked up the glass paperweight from her desk, turned it over once in his hand, and said, "I heard you brought the janitor in to fix Athena." He said the word janitor the way some people say the name of a city they have never visited and do not plan to. Elaine said, "I brought in a consulting engineer." Garrett said, "He mops floors." Elaine. Marcus had been in the room for 4 minutes, standing near the whiteboard with a marker in his hand, mid-explanation of the patch implementation sequence when Garrett walked in. He had not reacted to Garrett's entrance. He had not put the marker down. He was still looking at the board. Garrett said, "Is this a diversity initiative?" Or, Marcus said, without turning around, "The Cayman account opened under Meridian Satellite Holdings, LLC, received 4 wire transfers between August and December of last year. The authorization codes on all 4 matched the internal budget codes for the Athena contingency reserve." Garrett stopped. Marcus said, "The transfers total $4.3 million. The receiving institution in Georgetown has a compliance flag that the Sex Aerospace Industry Task Force opened last February." The room was very quiet. Marcus said, "The task force chair's name is on a briefing document in the Congressional Oversight folder. The folder is public record." Then he wrote a number on the whiteboard, a command timing offset, a column of figures, and said to Elaine, "If we implement the phase correction at this offset value, the synchronization should stabilize within the first handshake cycle. I'd like to run a simulation this afternoon." He returned to his notation. He did not look at Garrett again. Garrett Hale stood. He did not adjust his cuffs. He set the paperweight down in the wrong place, slightly off the center of the desk, canted at an angle, and walked out without a word. He did not threaten on his way out. He did not compose himself. He simply stopped being the kind of person who could be in that room, and then he was not in it. Elaine did not speak for a long time after the door closed. She sat in the silence and let it be what it was, which was a different kind of silence than she had been living in for 3 years, 2 months, and 19 days. She began to investigate quietly, because she had not become the person she was by taking anyone's word for anything, including the words of the man who appeared to be right about everything. She pulled the Meridian financial records she had access to. She called a contact at the SEC who she had known since she was 32, and who owed her a favor she had never collected. She learned, over the course of 4 days, that the Cayman transfers were real, that they had been executed through a shell entity Garrett had incorporated 2 years before joining Meridian, and that the Athena contingency reserve, the money that should have funded the troubleshooting operation that failed to find the handshake error, had been siphoned through 3 holding companies before disappearing. Which meant the reason no one had solved the satellite problem was not that the problem was unsolvable. It was that the money meant to solve it had been stolen, and so the engineers were working without tools, and the satellite stayed dark, and Elaine spent 3 years not sleeping. She drove to Oak Hill Elementary on a Friday evening after the last bell. She did not call ahead. She found Marcus in the schoolyard, watching Priya chase a soccer ball with 2 other children, both of whom were also narrating their own athletic achievements in the third person, which suggested this was a practice Priya had introduced and they had adopted. She stood beside him. She said, "I need to take you somewhere." He looked at her. He said, "Okay." They drove to a street in the Meridian Heights neighborhood. A quiet street with a small park at one end, and he knew why she had brought him here before she said a word. Because she could see it in the way he went still when the park came into view. There was a bench near the intersection. The intersection had a traffic signal. She pulled over and stopped the car and did not turn off the engine, and he looked at the bench and the signal and the way the late light came through the trees, and she understood that this was a place that was already a grave for him. She said, quietly, "Your wife." He said, "March 11th. The signal malfunctioned. The investigation report cited equipment age." A pause. The equipment was under a maintenance contract with Meridian's Urban Infrastructure Division. The contract that Garrett administered before he moved to acquisitions. He looked at the intersection. He said, "I didn't know about the contract until last year. I found the maintenance records in the Meridian archive when I was cleaning the records room." She said nothing. She understood that the thing that made her complicit was not any action she had taken, but what she had inherited. The company, the division's history, the contract that had let the signal fail on the corner where his wife's car was struck. She had not known. He had not known. She did not know. Both of those things were true simultaneously, and neither of them made the bench less of what it was. He said, "I'm not here for a reason, if that's what you're thinking. I'm here because the job was available, and the hours worked, and I was good at it." He looked at her. The satellite was separate. I heard the problem, and I knew the answer. That was separate. She said, "You could have said nothing." He said no. She said, "Why not?" He looked back at the bench. He said, "Because Priya is in room 14 at Oak Hill, and her teacher has a NASA poster on the wall, and last week she told me she wants to study the ocean when she grows up. And I would like there to be satellites that can map it." He paused. Also, it was wrong not to. He said both things in the same flat register, because to him they were the same weight. The Athena patch took 51 hours to write, test, simulate, and implement. On day 17 of the 19-day cycle, Marcus Webb sat at a terminal in the Meridian Signal Lab, in a visitor badge and the gray facilities uniform he had not changed because there had not been time, and transmitted the corrected timing sequence to the ground station antenna array. And 47 seconds later, the Athena satellite transmitted its first data packet in 3 years, 2 months, and 19 days. The signal was clean. The data was intact. The packet contained ocean floor topography readings from the southern Mariana region that the Meridian science team would spend the next 6 months analyzing. No one in the room said anything for a moment. Garrett Hale was, at the same moment, in a conference room on the 11th floor, and the door to that conference room was closed. And in the room with him were two investigators from the Sex Aerospace Industry Task Force, and a Meridian board member and the company's general counsel. And the document in front of him was a forensic audit report covering 7 years of wire transfers from entities he had incorporated. His hand reached once toward the lapel of his jacket, a reflex, reaching for the cuff adjustment, the old habit, and there was nothing there that was retrievable. He stopped. He looked at the document. He said, "I want my lawyer," and the board member said, "He's outside," and that was the last line he was given. 2 hours later, in the signal lab, Elaine turned to look at the man sitting at the terminal. He was writing something on a notepad, his notation, the same handwriting she had been looking at for 11 days, the same pressed neatness, the same economy. She looked at what she saw on his face, and what she saw was not triumph, not relief. It was the particular stillness of a person who has done the exact thing they knew how to do and needed no confirmation that it was the right thing. She said, "The board approved the final funding tranche this morning. $340 million. She paused. "I'd like to offer you a senior engineering position. Not consulting. Staff," he looked at the notepad. She said, "The salary is," he said, "I know what the salary is. Patricia told me last week." He set the pen down. "Can I give you an answer on Monday? I need to talk to Priya." She said, "Of course." He said, "She'll say yes. She's been saying yes for 11 days. She just doesn't know the question yet." 1 year later, Priya Webb is in the 2nd grade at Oak Hill Elementary, in room 14. And her teacher told Marcus at the last parent conference that Priya had given a 5-minute presentation to her class on satellite telemetry, and the other children had asked enough questions that they ran over time by 12 minutes, and the teacher said it with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has witnessed something she will remember. Priya carries the spiral notebook still. She has filled 16 pages since the year began. This morning she told her father, while pouring juice very carefully and doing an excellent job, that she had decided ocean floor mapping was still her first choice, but she was keeping satellite engineering as a strong second. His shop is not his shop. He does not have a shop, but the desk in the corner of the Meridian Signal Lab has his name on a placard, and on the desk there is a framed photograph of a woman he loved, and next to the photograph there is a NASA patch exactly like the one on the notebook, and he put it there on his first day because Priya asked him to. His hands carry the same calluses. His face carries less weight. There is a letter in his desk from the Meridian Board formally acknowledging the company's infrastructure division liability in the 2018 signal failure on Meridian Heights Boulevard. It took 8 months to negotiate. He does not think about it every day anymore. Some days he does not think about it at all. Elaine's office curtains are open now. They were always closed before. There is a drawing on her wall. Priya drew it the second time she came in. A satellite with a sun and what appears to be a very confident ocean. And Elaine has not taken it down because she likes the way it looks against the gray of the building exterior. All that orange crayon and one enormous fish. At the end of a Tuesday that ran late, she is at her desk reviewing the first Athena science report, and Marcus is at the door of her office with 2 cups of coffee. And she looks up, and he looks at her, and the look lasts 1 beat longer than necessary. And both of them know it, and neither of them names it, and the satellite overhead is awake and mapping the deep ocean floor, and somewhere under 11 kilometers of water. A ridge no human being has ever seen is being charted for the first time. Some things stay hidden not because they are buried, but because no one has yet stood in the right corridor eating rice at the right hour, and decided to listen. If you know someone who solved a problem that everyone else had given up on, share this with them, because they'll know exactly what that lunch break felt like. Subscribe if you want more stories about the kind of quiet that turns out to be capable. And the question I need you to answer in the comments: if you had the answer to an $11 billion problem, and giving it meant explaining who you really were, and you had spent 4 years making sure no one knew, would you say something? Or would you keep mopping the floor? We read every one.